for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson. I'm your host today. We have a lot of news to cover this week, including breaking news as of Friday morning, the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the 4th of July shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, that left 7 people dead and over 24 injured. And we have a very interesting off-the-cuff story for this week. We need a way to lighten things, especially this week with all the tragedy that's been going on. So we will get to all of that in just a moment. Before we get started, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. And you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, or Reason.fm by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. And we also want to give a special shout out to WNHN Concord, New Hampshire, for downloading last week's episode of Southpaws. Of course, WNHN is the flagship station for The Attitude with Arnie Arneson that airs every day. You can find The Attitude with Arnie Arneson on most of your Pacifica radio stations, so please check your listings for that great show. Well, let's go ahead and get right into the breaking news. We are recording this show on Friday, July 8th, 2022, and I woke up to this. Unbelievable that this happened in Japan, of all places. I have this story. This is John Ruwich writing for National Public Radio. This is dated July 8th. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, an ultranationalist who served in the post longer than anyone else before stepping down in 2020, was shot and killed Friday at a campaign rally. Police tackled and arrested the suspected gunman at the scene of an attack that shocked many in Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws and is one of the world's safest nations. Current Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told the media, quote, "It is barbaric and malicious and it cannot be tolerated," end of quote. The 67-year-old former Prime Minister served in 2006 and 2007. He also served again from 2012 to 2020 when he suddenly resigned citing health issues. Despite leaving office, he remained influential within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and continued to be a force on Japan's political landscape. He was in the city of Nara in the southwest campaigning for a parliamentary election when he was shot from behind by a man wielding what appears in photos to be a homemade shotgun. Footage of the attack shows Abe standing, holding a microphone and speaking when 2 booming shots ring out. Nara Medical University Emergency Department Chief Hidetada Fukushima said that Abe suffered major damage to his heart in addition to 2 neck wounds that damaged an artery, causing extensive bleeding. Japan's public broadcaster NHK reported that the suspect served in Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force for 3 years in the 2000s. Of course, with such a high-profile assassination, there has been statements from all around the world. The White House said in a statement it was shocked and saddened by the attack, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was in Asia for a meeting of a group of 20 foreign ministers, called the assassination profoundly disturbing and described Abe as a leader of a great nation. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi described Abe as, quote, a towering global statesman, an outstanding leader, and a remarkable administrator, end of quote. He said on Twitter that July 9th would be a day of national mourning in India. Russian President Vladimir Putin described Abe as an outstanding statesman. Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott described him simply as Japan's, quote, most significant post-war leader, end of quote. As Prime Minister, Abe worked to build up Japan's military, countered China's growing clout, and sought to boost and reform the economy through a program that came to be known as Abenomics. During his tenure, Abe reformed immigration policy, female labor force participation climbed, and the Japanese economy unexpectedly returned to healthy growth. He ultimately failed to achieve his most cherished political goal and that of his party, to revise Japan's pacifist post-World War II constitution. Abe proposed revisions would strengthen the government's emergency powers while downplaying the role of human rights. Abe felt the political values imposed by the U.S.-backed Constitution were alien to some of Japan's traditions, such as reverence for the emperor. Abe was, however, successful in passing legislation in 2015 that allows Japan's military to expand its operations overseas in support of allies, including the United States. When he left office, most Japanese were dissatisfied with his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, feeling he moved too slowly to impose a state of emergency, mostly out of concerns about the economy. In recent months, Abe had been a more outspoken critic of China. Earlier this year, he called on the United States to drop its long-standing practice of strategic ambiguity and give Taiwan assurances that it could count on American help in the event of an attack by China. He also angered China by saying, quote, a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency, end of quote, and noting that it would be impossible for Japan not to be sucked into a conflict over the self-governed island that Beijing considers a part of China. So that is the breaking news as of Friday, July 8th, 2022. Once again, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe assassinated while on a campaign stop in Japan. And like I said, this is really unusual for a country that has some of the toughest gun restrictions on the planet. So I'm really shocked that this really occurred. I really am. But apparently the weapon was homemade. So how do you prepare for something like that? I mean, you really can't. It's just, I don't even know what to say at this point. I know that Abe was pretty popular in Japan during his reign, but again, the coronavirus pandemic kind of led to his downfall. Well, that isn't going to be the only story about gun violence that we talk about today. As many of you know, the 4th of July was a bloody Monday of sorts. A shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, during a 4th of July parade. 7 dead, over 24 injured, and we're going to get to the details of that right now. I have several stories. The first one is Andy Grimm and Manny Ramos writing for the Chicago Sun-Times. This is dated July 6th. The man charged with the July 4th massacre in Highland Park has confessed that he fired more than 80 rounds from a rooftop into a crowd of spectators lining the downtown parade route and considered shooting more people in Wisconsin later that day. That's according to authorities. After wounding dozens of people, 7 of them fatally with 2 rapid bursts from an assault-style rifle, Robert Cremo III fled in his mother's car and drove to Madison, Lake County officials said. Lake County Major Crimes Task Force spokesman Christopher Covelli said, quote, he was driving around, he did see a celebration that was occurring in Madison, Wisconsin, and he seriously contemplated using the firearm he had in his vehicle to commit another shooting. We don't have information to suggest he planned on driving to Madison initially to commit another attack. We do believe he was driving around from the first attack and saw the celebration, end of quote. FBI officials alerted Madison police that Cremo was in the area. Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes said his department mobilized its SWAT team, but Cremo was arrested in Lake Forest about an hour away before his officers could be deployed. FBI agents located Cremo's cell phone at a service station in the Madison suburb of Middleton on Monday in the dirt at the edge of a parking lot. Police and prosecutors have so far disclosed no motive for the rampage, but Cremo apparently had an affinity for the number 47, which was painted on his car, according to Cavelli. Cavelli added that you flip the numbers and you have 7 and 4, the date of the shooting. Now, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to give you my little theory on why he had the affinity for 47. Cremo was a Trump supporter. Daddy ran for office in Highland Park, Illinois, ran for mayor, and got his ass kicked. Little Junior here that did the shooting probably thought 47, if Trump gets reelected, he'll be president 47. Because that's how the numbering system works. Cleveland was 22nd and 24th. If Trump were to be elected in 24, he'd be the 45th and the 47th president. So right there's your affinity for the number 47, in my opinion. Let me continue here. The latest details were made public as Cremo appeared by video conference in a Lake County courtroom, charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. Wearing a black T-shirt, his face framed by long dark hair, Cremo was mostly silent as he stood with his hands in front of him, showing no reaction when Assistant State's Attorney Ben Dillon recited the names of the 7 victims and described the scene from Monday's shooting. On the day of the attack, Cremo dressed in girls' clothes and wore makeup to cover his distinctive face tattoos because he feared he would be recognized, Dillon said. Surveillance video shows Cremo walking down an alley behind a building at the northwest corner of Central Avenue and 2nd Street and climbing a fire escape to reach the roof. Dillon said, quote, the defendant relayed to investigators that he looked down his sights, aimed, and opened fire at people across the street, end of quote. Cremo said he fired a full 30-round magazine from the rifle, then a second and third magazine. Police found 83 shell casings. Nearly 50 people were hit by gunfire. 5 died at the scene. 2 more died. A 6th died later Monday at the hospital. A 7th victim died at Evanston Hospital, according to the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. Despite his disguise, police officers who were familiar with Cremo were able to identify him in still images taken from surveillance cameras after the shooting, according to Dillon. Video shows Cremo running down the alley with a black bag over his shoulder. A rifle, a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-automatic wrapped in a cloth, fell from the bag as Cremo ran. Police recovered the weapon within minutes and traced it to Cremo, who had purchased the weapon at a local gun store in 2020 when he was 19. Cremo went to his mother's nearby home and took off in her car as police launched a manhunt and neighboring towns canceled their Independence Day festivities. In Madison, he spotted a group of people and thought about shooting them with a second rifle in the car, according to Cavelli. Cremo had about 60 rounds in the car with him, but he apparently felt he hadn't put enough thought and research into opening fire, according to Cavelli. He turned back, dumped his cell phone in Middleton, and was finally spotted Monday evening in North Chicago about 8 hours after the shooting. He was arrested around 5:30 p.m. after a brief car chase. At a press conference in Madison, Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway called for state and federal legislators to pass stricter gun laws. She said, quote, this time the shooter wreaked havoc in Highland Park and drove to Madison. Next time it could be anywhere. On his way here, he drove past hundreds of communities celebrating the 4th of July. All of us are at risk when weapons of war are on our streets. End of quote. Cremo had been able to buy the weapon even though just months earlier police had been called to his house after a family member reported he was threatening to kill everybody. Officers removed 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword from the home during the September 2019 incident. Police filed a clear and present danger report with the Illinois State Police. In December of that year, Cremo's father sponsored Cremo's application for a firearm owner identification card because he was too young to get the license without permission. Cremo was issued a firearm owner identification card in January despite the 2019 report to the state police. Police seized a total of 5 firearms, all legally purchased by Cremo, including the alleged murder weapon and the second rifle that Cremo had with him in the car when he was arrested Monday evening after a brief chase that ended in Lake Forest about 10 miles from the shooting scene. Cremo was charged Tuesday as officials began releasing the names of the dead, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart said the investigation remains active and asked for witnesses and anyone with video from the shooting to come forward. Cremo's bond hearing began with confusion over who was representing him. Defense attorney Thomas Durkin, who had represented terrorism suspects imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay, had said Tuesday that he would represent Cremo. But on Wednesday, he told Judge Theodore Pekonjak that family members made him aware of a conflict of interest that would prevent him from taking Cremo as a client. Assistant Public Defender Gregory Ticksay was appointed to represent Cremo at the hearing, and after a brief conference with his client, said he would not immediately oppose the no bond request from prosecutors. Cremo's next court appearance is set for July 28th. And let's get into some of the victims here. The first one is a young victim who is still alive. This is Brett Chase writing for the Chicago Sun-Times. Listen to this. This is horrible, folks. An 8-year-old boy remains in critical condition after a bullet from the July 4th mass shooting in Highland Park severed his spine. Cooper Roberts is in critical but stable condition at the University of Chicago's Comer Children's Hospital. After being shot in the chest at the parade, he was airlifted Monday after being initially treated at another hospital near the incident. Cooper was with his mother, Kelly Roberts, who is the superintendent for Zion Elementary School District 6. She was also shot and is recovering, according to a statement from the family. His twin brother, Luke, was treated for shrapnel wounds to the leg. Cooper's situation is much more dire. According to a GoFundMe set up to help the family pay medical costs, quote, after several surgeries, the little guy is fighting as hard as he can. His medical bills will be significant, as will the therapy that will follow, end of quote. Yeah, that is awful. And this is a story that's not talked about a lot. We don't hear about Cooper Roberts. We hear about the victims. We hear about the shooter. We hear about the 2-year-old that was orphaned, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. Matter of fact, let's get to it right now. I have this story. This is staff from the Chicago Sun-Times. This is a collaboration piece here dated July 7th. This story talks about the lives lost at the Highland Park shooting. They start out with Kevin and Irina McCarthy. Kevin is 37, Irina was 35. Born in Russia, Irina McCarthy settled in the Chicago area with her immigrant father and mother. She worked as a waitress and attended Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire and DePaul University before landing a job in digital marketing in the pharmaceutical industry, her father said. Irina met her husband, Kevin, who worked for a gene therapy startup through her job in pharmaceuticals. The couple had a little boy, 2-year-old Aiden McCarthy. The McCarthys lived in Highland Park and had been looking forward to going to the parade with Aiden. That's according to Irina's father, Michael Levberg. Aiden's grandfather said, quote, they were crazy about their child. They were planning to, end of quote. Aiden survived because his father shielded him with his body, according to his grandfather. Kevin is also survived by his father, Michael, and sister Katie, and that is according to Irina's cousin, Montgomery Kirsten. Kirsten said, quote, we're going to join forces to support Aiden here and to do the best we can to help our nation try and prevent these events from happening in the future, end of quote. They have set up a GoFundMe page for the boy, and it has gone over $2 million as of this point. The next victim they talk about is 63-year-old Jacqueline Sondheim of Highland Park. She was a beloved preschool teacher at North Shore Congregation Israel. In a letter to worshipers, Rabbi Wendy Geffen said that Sondheim was a lifelong congregant who worked for decades on the synagogue staff. Geffen wrote, quote, Jackie's work, kindness, and warmth touched us all, from her teaching at the Gates of Learning preschool to guiding innumerable among us through life's moments of joy and sorrow, all of this with tireless dedication. There are no words sufficient to express the depth of our grief for Jackie's death and sympathy for her family and loved ones, end of quote. She is survived by her husband, Bruce, a daughter, Leah, and a sister, Tracy. On a GoFundMe page created for the family, a friend wrote, quote, anyone who knew Jackie was grateful to have her in their life. More importantly, Jackie was beloved by her family as the best mom, wife, sister, and aunt, end of quote. Sondheim's funeral service is being held Friday morning, so that's the latest on that. The next victim they talk about is 64-year-old Catherine Goldstein. She was a loving mother, friend, and an avid bird watcher. That's according to her friend Jill Kirschenbaum. Kirschenbaum said she got to know Goldstein while their daughters attended middle school in Highland Park. They got to know each other on an overnight trip for a STEM-related activity their daughters participated in. Kirschenbaum said, quote, she was a bird lover, end of quote. She also called her best friend, quote, the kindest, sweetest, end of quote. Kirschenbaum said she knew Goldstein as a mother and wants people to remember how much she cared about her children and, quote, how much she cared about their future, how much she wanted them to succeed, how much she believed in them. She really loved her family, end of quote. The next victim they talk about is 69-year-old Eduardo Uvaldo. For 2 days, Eduardo Uvaldo had remained at Evanston Hospital. Wednesday morning, he died of the gunshot wounds he suffered at Highland Park's 4th of July parade. His lifelong friend Jackie Tapia said, quote, he was a wonderful father, a wonderful grandfather. He was loving, caring, and taught his daughters and family to always stay united. He was just a wonderful person, end of quote. Uvaldo didn't usually go to places where there would be a big crowd, but the parade was an event that he and his family attended every year, according to Tapia. She said that he went with Maria Uvaldo, his wife of 50 years, 2 of their daughters, their spouses, and their grandsons. His wife was also wounded, struck with bullet fragments in the head, and their grandson was shot in the arm. Both were doing fine. They are both out of the hospital. Tapia said that Maria Uvaldo, quote, is devastated at the moment. There is nothing that can calm her down. As for her injuries, they're minor, so she should recover. She's just overwhelmed now, end of quote. Uvaldo's granddaughter also started a GoFundMe page to help the family with funeral expenses and to help his wife. The granddaughter wrote on the GoFundMe page, quote, my grandpa is a kind, loving, and funny man who did not deserve this, end of quote. And I would argue that none of the people that were the victims of this horrible shooting deserved any of this. The next victim they talk about is 78-year-old Nicholas Toledo Zaragoza. He spent most of his life in Morelos, Mexico, and had come to Illinois to visit his family about 2 months ago. The family wanted him to stay permanently because of injuries he suffered when he was struck by a car while visiting Highland Park. At 78, Toledo had 8 children, most in the United States, others in Mexico, according to his granddaughter. His granddaughter added that he liked color, enjoyed fishing, and liked to take walks around Highland Park. She also recalled his big smile and bright blue eyes, adding, quote, he never wanted to be inside, he always wanted to be outside, end of quote. Nicholas Toledo preferred a home-cooked meal to eating out. He also had a sense of humor and would joke about her grandmother taking his shoes. The granddaughter said, quote, he was a sweet, caring grandfather. He wanted only the best for his kids and grandchildren, end of quote. She added, quote, he was so happy to be living in the moment, end of quote. They didn't realize someone had opened fire on the crowd until bullets started coming toward them. 3 of the bullets struck her grandfather, killing him at the scene. She added, quote, he was the one who saved all of our lives. It would have gone to me, my boyfriend, or my cousins, end of quote. Instead of getting together for a 4th of July cookout like the family had planned to do after the parade, the granddaughter said that the family remained in a state of shock. The family has created a GoFundMe campaign to help with funeral expenses. The family wrote on the GoFundMe page, quote, not only was Nicholas a loving man, he was creative, adventurous, and funny. I love you, abuelito. Descanse en paz, end of quote. The next victim is 88-year-old Stephen Strauss. He looked forward to each day. He worked full-time as a financial advisor, and according to his son Peter Strauss, was, quote, the oldest member of the staff, end of quote, at the Stifel investment firm. Stephen Strauss walked to the Metra, biked, and loved watching the birds and squirrels around his home in Highland Park. He was a frequent visitor to the Art Institute and often attended Friday night concerts by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He was quick with a quip, and his favorite movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey. The shooting at the Highland Park 4th of July parade cut short the life of a man who, according to his son, quote, loved life and tried to live every day to its fullest and was generous and kind, end of quote. Strauss grew up on the south side of Chicago, a grandson of German immigrants. He attended a Hyde Park area high school and Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. In September, he and his wife Linda, whom he met in Chicago, would have celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, their son said. Strauss was a generous and knowledgeable mentor to others, according to financial columnist Terry Savage, who said he was helpful with advice when she was starting out as a stockbroker. Savage said, quote, he was so smart and so funny. Anyone that had him as a financial advisor was lucky. He was current and witty and always had a pithy comment about the stock market, end of quote. Strauss is also survived by his son Jonathan, brother Larry, and 4 grandchildren. In addition to individual GoFundMe campaigns for the victims' families, Highland Park community members say the donations can be made to various organizations aiding victims such as the Highland Park Community Foundation, the Balance Project, as well as a GoFundMe page created to benefit all of the victims of the shooting. So you can find all of that at the Chicago Sun-Times website. And I was dumbstruck when the news came out about this shooting. When are we going to start taking the guns away from these conservative traitors? When's it going to happen, folks? The conservatives complain every year, especially around election time. Oh, the Democrats are coming to take our guns. You know what? I wish it would happen. I really wish it would. I'll say this again, like I said last week. It is time, beyond time, for the smart people in this country to take it back from the dummies, from the traitors, from the evil, violent, conservative savages. It's time. It really is. Are we going to wait for another mass shooting? It's unreal. It is absolutely unreal. Well, some people are fighting back. I want to get to this story. This is Abriella Thiel writing for WMTV out of Madison, Wisconsin. Folks, sometimes the world needs a hero, and sometimes the world gets one. Or in this case, several. The Madison Police Department is investigating a graffiti damage to property complaint at a Catholic church in Madison. Madison police said the incident at 2450 Atwood Avenue likely happened overnight. By the way, this story was written on July 2nd. St. Bernard Catholic Church's front door and signage were damaged by graffiti, which contained anti-pro-life and anti-police messages, according to officers. Oh, it also accuses the Catholic Church of murdering children, which we've talked about on this show for a number of years with the quote-unquote re-education schools that they pulled all the native children out of, forced them to learn English, forced them to get rid of their own customs and language, raped these children, impregnated them, killed the babies, buried the children. It's all throughout Canada, all throughout Michigan. We've talked about it for years on this show. We were one of the first shows to talk about the atrocities of the Catholic Church in this country. The graffiti spans across the front door and entrance area in blue spray paint lettering. And if you saw the pictures, they're beautiful. I love it. St. Bernard pastor Michael Radowitz said in a statement to NBC 15 News, quote, St. Bernard Parish is saddened over the graffiti on the front of the church. We understand people's anger over the recent ruling by the Supreme Court, but this does nothing to solve any issues. We join in prayer for those who did this, that the Lord may heal their hearts, and investigation is ongoing with the Madison police. End of quote. No, the healing of the hearts will begin when the Catholic Church, and for that matter, all the other churches, shut down in this country. My opinion. Folks, I keep telling you on this show, I've told you for years, people are walking away from religion. They're running from it. They see what it is. It's a bunch of fairy tales, fables. It's not the actual word of God, because there is no God. Got news for you. Bad news for you, folks. By the way, they're wanting information on who was responsible for this, so here's my commentary. Anyone with information should keep it to themselves and shut their fucking mouths because all cops are bastards. There's my commentary. All of them. All of it. Including your uncle, including my cousin who worked for the Grand Rapids Police Department once upon a time. Bastards. All of them. They lie. They create more problems than most people do. Most of the general population, whatever you want to call it. Us everyday ordinary slobs, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. And I'll tell you what, this graffiti, I'm hoping it's Jane's Revenge that did this. For those of you who don't know who this group is, Jane's Revenge is a loose-knit affiliation of militant pro-choice people who have finally had enough of the conservative traitors trying to tell women what to do with their bodies. They have had enough. They have been spray painting graffiti. They have been involved in, I believe, a couple of Molotov cocktail incidents. They've had enough. And I tell you what, I'll go on record right now. I support them 100%. This is what would be called chaotic good. Not chaotic bad, chaotic good. Because they finally have said enough is enough. We're going to fight back. And this is what needs to happen in this country. It really is. It's unbelievable. People want to sit around and they don't want to do anything. And it's just beyond the pale at this point. Complacency is complicity. It really is, folks. If you sit back and do nothing, you're going to get the results of your actions. Or in this case, your inactions. This is why Roe versus Wade got overturned. This is why Miranda got overturned. This is why separation of church and state is being dismantled. By the way, this is why your Second Amendment rights are being strengthened by a bunch of conservative traitors wearing black robes in the Supreme Court. Yes, I said it. I don't care. I'm sick of it. I'll just repeat what I said on the 4th of July when I burned a flag. Yes, I burned an American flag in protest, in support of my First Amendment rights. And I said that this country has become a shithole, because it has. It really has. This country doesn't exist anymore, folks. It doesn't. Not the country that I grew up in, not the country that I remember. It's done. It's over. It really is. And the reason that it's done and it's over is because all the quote-unquote good people stood around, did nothing, and said, oh, we can agree to disagree. Those people are entitled to their opinions. Wrong answer. Definitely wrong answer. Sorry, you're not entitled to your wrong opinion. You really are not. I got news for you. Oh, but Darren, you got to be nice to those people. No, I don't. No, I don't. I have the right to feel the way that I do just as much as you have the right to feel the way that you do. And I'm not going to change for anybody, so you don't even bother looking for me to change. This is what needs to happen. And I'm glad, thankful for Jane's Revenge. Because it's time. It's time. It really is. Speaking of time, time's running out for Trump and his cronies. And I've got this story. This is Tamar Holloman writing for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This is dated July 5th. The Fulton County Special Grand Jury investigating potential criminal interference in Georgia's 2020 elections has subpoenaed key members of Donald Trump's legal team, including his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. That is according to copies obtained by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. In addition to Giuliani, those being summoned include John Eastman, Cleta Mitchell, Kenneth Chesbrough, and Jenna Ellis, all of whom advised the Trump campaign on strategies for overturning Joe Biden's wins in Georgia and other swing states. The grand jury also subpoenaed U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, one of Trump's top allies, along with attorney and podcast host Jackie Pick Deason. The subpoenas were filed July 5th and signed by Fulton Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney, who is overseeing the special grand jury. They noted that all 7 people were, quote, a necessary and material witness, end of quote, to the investigation. Unlike subpoenas issued to Georgians, the summons required McBurney's blessing since they are for people who reside outside the state. The 23-person special grand jury has heard testimony in recent weeks from a parade of witnesses, including some who had direct contact with Trump and his associates in late 2020 and early 2021. But Tuesday's subpoenas are the closest jurors have gotten to the Trump campaign or inner circle of Trump. Giuliani testified before Georgia legislators in late 2020, showing edited surveillance video of ballots being tabulated at Atlanta's State Farm Arena. The former New York City mayor said the tape was, quote, a powerful smoking gun, end of quote, of election workers pulling out suitcases of ballots to count after sending Republican poll watchers home. Giuliani's claims were quickly debunked by the Secretary of State's office, but he continued to screen the video and doubled down on his comments in the weeks after. He was later suspended from practicing law in New York, in part because of his testimony in Georgia. And by the way, he's probably going to lose his law license in the District of Columbia as well, and I'm going to love it. Eastman, a former law professor, was a key architect of the plan to press Vice President Mike Pence to reject the official Democratic electors in Georgia and other swing states and opt for an alternative slate of GOP electors. A federal judge in March argued that, quote, it is more likely than not that Donald Trump and Dr. Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, end of quote. Eastman testified at the same Georgia hearing as Giuliani, during which he argued that there was, quote, more than enough, end of quote, evidence of fraud and improper conduct to warrant Georgia lawmakers picking an alternative slate of presidential electors. Eastman said, quote, I don't think it's just your authority to do that, but quite frankly, I think you have a duty to do that to protect the integrity of the election here in Georgia, end of quote. Yeah, the integrity of the election. What a bunch of crap. Unbelievable. I mean, really. Yeah. Deason and Ellis also spoke at the same hearing. Chesborough worked with the leadership of the Georgia GOP to coordinate a slate of alternate Republican electors, according to his subpoena. The DA's office said Chesborough drafted at least 2 memos in support of the plan and provided a template of documents to the party for its sham ceremony at the Georgia Capitol on December 14, 2020. Mitchell, a conservative lawyer based in Washington, D.C., advised Trump on the infamous January 2, 2021 call that the Republican placed to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. During that conversation, in which Trump asked Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes, Mitchell aided Trump as he made unsubstantiated claims about Georgia's elections. Graham separately called Raffensperger and his staff twice in the weeks following the November 2020 elections, quote, about re-examining certain absentee ballots cast in Georgia in order to explore the possibility of a more favorable outcome for Donald Trump, end of quote. That's according to the subpoena. Graham previously denied wrongdoing, and let me stop you right there. Here's what Graham was wanting to do. Graham was wanting to throw out the votes of black and brown people who supported Joe Biden. Period. End of story. Let me continue. It may be difficult for Fulton prosecutors to secure testimony from Giuliani, Eastman, Mitchell, Chesborough, Deason, and Ellis, since they could argue attorney-client privilege. Eastman claimed the exemption as he sought to block the handover of evidence to the Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack, though he was largely shot down by a federal judge. Bob Costello, Giuliani's attorney, declined to comment and said his client had not been served any subpoena. Spokesman for Graham did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Graham, by the way, now says he's going to fight the subpoena. He's probably going to lose, and I'm going to love it. Fulton County DA Fani Willis launched the criminal probe into Georgia's elections in February 2021, weeks after a recording of the Trump-Raffensperger phone call leaked. She's since expanded the investigation to include the fake GOP electors, Giuliani's testimony to state legislators, and other efforts to pressure Georgia officials to act in Trump's favor. The special grand jury has permission to meet until May 2023, though Willis said she's expecting the group's work to wrap up long before then. Jurors are expected to draft a report at the end of their service recommending whether Willis should press charges against Trump or his allies, though the final decision ultimately rests with the DA, who is a Democrat elected in 2020. Raffensperger, several of his deputies, and Attorney General Chris Carr have already testified before the grand jury. Governor Brian Kemp, who rebuffed pressure from Trump to call a special session of the state legislature to reverse the election results, is slated to give a video statement later this month. Willis is currently fighting with at least 2 current and former Republican officials in Georgia over subpoenas. Attorneys for Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan and ex-Senator William Ligon argued last week that the state constitution shields them from testifying about anything related to their legislative activities. I can tell you that's bullshit, too. Sorry, you can't use your position to cover up crimes. Got news for you. The district attorney's office countered that activities that seek to reverse certified election results are not protected by so-called legislative immunity. McBurney, who heard arguments from the DA's office and the lawmakers on Friday, is currently drafting a framework about the types of questions prosecutors can ask without violating immunity rules. I'd ask anything. Screw them. So here's the list of Trump allies subpoenaed by Georgia. Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal attorney who testified before Georgia's Senate panel in December 2020. John Eastman, attorney and architect of the alternative elector scheme. Cleta Mitchell, an attorney who sat in on Trump's January 2021 phone call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Kenneth Chesborough, attorney who worked with Georgia Republicans to coordinate the alternative electors in December 2020. Jenna Ellis, an attorney who testified in Georgia's Senate about voter fraud. Jackie Pick-Deason, attorney and podcast host, testified before state legislature about voter fraud. And Lindsey Graham, the U.S. Senator for South Carolina, who called Raffensperger and his staff twice about re-examining some of Georgia's absentee ballots. So, yeah, there you go. There's the whole list, folks, and there's probably going to be more, and I'm going to love it. This needs to happen. Tell you what else needs to happen. Ryan Kelly. We have an update on Ryan Kelly, who is running for governor of Michigan. I've got this story. This is Rachel Van Gilder writing for Wood Television. This is dated July 7th out of Grand Rapids. Ryan Kelly pleaded not guilty on all 4 misdemeanor charges Thursday during his arraignment that took place via video call. Kelly was arrested June 9th on misdemeanor charges of knowingly entering or remaining in any restricted building or grounds without lawful authority, disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building or grounds, knowingly engaging in any act of physical violence against person or property in any restricted grounds or buildings, and destruction of government property. The riot happened as a crowd of anti-government groups and supporters of Donald Trump advanced on the Capitol, forcing Congress to pause its certification of the Electoral College in favor of President Joe Biden. More than 800 people, including several from Michigan, have been charged in connection to the traitorous riot. They are traitors. A criminal complaint filed by the FBI alleges Kelly climbed onto an architectural feature of the Capitol and waved other rioters to continue forward. The FBI also says Kelly supported a rioter who pulled a metal barricade onto scaffolding and that he took photos of blood on Capitol grounds. Court documents dated June 22nd say he is accused of destroying a tarp covering scaffolding on the Capitol. The damage was valued at less than $1,000. Authorities do not allege that Kelly entered the building. The 40-year-old is a real estate broker who was previously an Allendale Township Planning Commissioner, though he no longer serves on any township board. He is running for Michigan governor as a Republican. June polls showed him among the front-runners in the primary race, with between 13 and 17% of those surveyed saying they would vote for him. Most of the people surveyed, about 45%, had not yet chosen who they would vote for on August 2nd. Kelly's campaign has painted the charges against him as political persecution orchestrated by Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, both Democrats, though the charges were filed against him at the federal level, separate from the state government, and Nessel's office says it was not involved. In the Republican gubernatorial debate on Wednesday, Kelly said he was in Washington during the riot and argued that his actions were protected by the First Amendment. Yeah. I got news for you. They're not. Rioting is not protected speech. Got news for you there. Kelly is scheduled for a status conference by video appearance on September 22nd. And by the way, I have not yet watched the Republican gubernatorial debate in Michigan. I really can't do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to hear what a bunch of evil, violent, conservative traitors have to say. Apparently, the debate is up on Wood TV's website, so you can watch it to your heart's content. The participants of the debate were Ryan Kelly, Garrett Soldano, the chiropractor who railed against masks and COVID restrictions and everything else during the pandemic, Kevin Rinke, or as we call him on this show, Rinky Dink. Him and Daddy own a car dealership over on the east side of the state. Rinke has been sued in court several times for alleged racist remarks he's made and sexual misconduct that he has been accused of. So, yeah, Rinky Dink. And the other participant in the gubernatorial debate is podcast host Tudor Dixon. She is being supported by Betsy DeVos and the DeVos clan. And clan is spelled KKK clan. There you go. Yeah, I can make a comment about Tudor Dixon's name, but that would violate FCC regulations, so I'm going to let the amateur comics do that one. Just think about it. Sexual preferences, folks. Anyways, and speaking of the January 6th, I have this story. This is Rebecca Kaplan and Catherine Watson writing for CBS News. This is dated July 7th out of Washington. Pat Cipollone, who served as White House counsel under Donald Trump, has reached an agreement to appear Friday, today, before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th assault on the Capitol. That's according to two sources familiar with the matter. The panel issued a subpoena for Cipollone's testimony last week after former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson testified that Cipollone strongly opposed Trump's efforts to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. Other witnesses have testified that Cipollone was one of the main White House officials opposed to attempts by Trump and his allies to overturn the results of the 2020 election. He previously sat for an informal interview with the committee. Hutchinson testified that Cipollone said a trip to the Capitol would present serious legal concerns and urged her multiple times to work to make sure such a trip didn't happen. Hutchinson recalled Cipollone telling her, quote, "Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen." End of quote. Hutchinson also recounted an exchange between White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who was her boss, and Cipollone as rioters breached the Capitol on January 6th. Cipollone urged Meadows to speak to the president, Hutchinson said. She testified that Cipollone told Meadows that, quote, "Something needs to be done or people are going to die, and the blood is going to be on your effing hands," end of quote. Announcing the subpoena last week, committee chairman Benny Thompson and vice chair Liz Cheney said the committee, quote, "has revealed evidence that Mr. Cipollone repeatedly raised legal and other concerns about Donald Trump's activities on January 6th and in the days that preceded," end of quote. The committee, they said, quote, "needs to hear from him on the record as other former White House counsels have done in other congressional investigations," end of quote. Democratic Representative Adam Schiff, a member of the committee, told CBS's Face the Nation Sunday that the panel, quote, "is following additional leads," end of quote, after Hutchinson's bombshell testimony last week. Yes, indeed. And I love it. This is beautiful. This needs to happen. Take them all down, and then when you get the evidence, it needs to go to the DOJ, and Merrick Garland needs to start prosecuting for treason. It really needs to happen, folks. It really does. You want to put an end to future results of this? Treason charges need to be filed and prosecuted. Period. By the way, Pacifica Radio will be hosting live coverage of the January 6th committee. That's going to be Tuesday, July 12th, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. This will be hosted by Mitch Jeserich of KPFA Radio. He's the host of Letters and Politics, which is also a great show that's carried over most Pacifica radio stations. This could be some interesting stuff coming up here on the next committee hearing. I love it. This is great. This is beautiful stuff, and it needs to happen. It really does. Before we get to our off-the-cuff segment, I have this story. This is Seung Min Kim, Zeke Miller, and Chris McGarrian writing for the Associated Press July 8th out of Washington. President Joe Biden delivered impassioned remarks Friday condemning the extreme Supreme Court majority that ended a constitutional right to abortion and pleading with Americans upset by the decision to vote in November. He signed an executive order to try to protect access to the procedure under mounting pressure from fellow Democrats to be more forceful in response to the ruling. The actions Biden outlined are intended to mitigate some potential penalties that women seeking abortion may face after the ruling. But his order cannot restore access to abortion in the more than a dozen states where strict limits or total bans have gone into effect. About a dozen more states are set to impose additional restrictions. Biden acknowledged the limitations facing his office, saying it would require an act of Congress to restore nationwide access to the way it was before the June 24th decision. Now, let me just stop right here. The Democrats have had nearly 50 years to codify Roe v. Wade into law, and they haven't done so. Do you want to know why? For the same reasons that the Republicans haven't banned it outright. It's because both parties fundraise off of abortion. They don't want it to go away. They don't want it to be settled law because they raise money off of it. That's the way it is. Period. End of story. Biden said, quote, "The fastest way to restore Roe is to pass a national law. The challenge is go out and vote. For God's sake, there's an election in November." End of quote. No, we're beyond elections at this point. As I said earlier, it's time to start taking the tactics of Jane's Revenge and do it that way. We also need to have millions of women marching in the streets, just like they did in Poland when Poland tried to do this, when Poland tried to limit abortions and tried to ban abortions. Several million women started marching in the streets of Poland and said, absolutely not, we will strike. And they did. And the government said, oh, we better back off of this. This is not a good thing to do. And they did. They backed off, which is why abortion is still legal in Poland, but now it's not even guaranteed in the United States. And for you conservative Democrats who want to blame Bernie Sanders voters, go f*** yourself. You are the problem. Ugh. I tell you what, before I get too upset, let's go to off the cuff because we've got a great story. This is Jasmine Tolliver writing for the Huffington Post. This is dated June 30th. A recent Carnival cruise packed an unexpected punch. A huge fight that took place among a crowd of passengers aboard the Carnival Magic was allegedly ignited by allegations of cheating. That is according to a passenger who shared video of the fight with Fox Propaganda Digital. An alleged threesome among guests aboard the vessel caused a rift after one person's significant other discovered the tryst on the trip, according to the witnesses. Say tryst on the trip 3 times fast. See how you go. The onlooker, identified as Teresa James, who identified herself as a travel agent, said that she saw the fight from her cabin door. She told Fox Propaganda that the melee began around 2 a.m. near the ship's dance club and casino on the 5th floor. She described the passengers who sparked the fight as, quote, ignorant fools acting stupid, end of quote. Isn't that the case with every fight that starts? Ignorant fools acting stupid. Now tell me something I don't know. The viral video that's been shared on Twitter showcased the rumble, which involved beer bottles being smashed and a possible cut injury, according to James. The brawl lasted about an hour and involved an estimated 60 people, according to the travel agent. By the way, the battle moved from the 5th floor to the ship's 1st floor. So just imagine like a Harold Lloyd or Three Stooges. The fight is going up the stairwell and going on in the elevators as they go up to the 1st floor. Oh, good Lord. Or down, or however it works. I don't know. Although I probably shouldn't use that phrase involving a fight where there's been a threesome. James credited Carnival security team for the de-escalating of the chaos. Eventually, the cruise line security had to call the U.S. Coast Guard to escort the ship to shore, according to a report by the New York Post. On Tuesday morning, when the ship arrived in Manhattan on schedule, New York police were waiting at the terminal as it docked. At this time, it's unknown whether any guests were arrested or whether New York or New Jersey authorities will handle the incident since it occurred on international waters. HuffPost has reached out to Carnival Cruise Line for comment, and apparently they haven't heard back from them. So, yeah, mutiny on the high seas. Oh, God. Oh, boy, folks. It's real simple. If you're going to engage in that behavior, just, one, don't. If you're in a committed relationship, don't do this. If you're in a relationship where this type of behavior is allowed, then be open with your significant other about what's going on. Oh, secrets always cause problems. They really do. Well, I tell you what, folks, we are just about out of time for this show. I do want to make a mention of something that's going to be coming up here in the next few weeks. We are going to be recording a very special episode of Southpaws where I'm going to be joined by Katie J., who is my best friend in the entire world and has been a guest co-host of this show over the years. We're going to talk very specifically about Roe versus Wade, and we're going to talk about the consequences of what the overturning of Roe versus Wade means to women in this country. Not just in the state of Michigan, not just in the states where this show airs. We're talking about women everywhere. And there's been a bunch of consequences. The last abortion clinic in Mississippi closed earlier this week. And women in Mississippi now have to travel out of state to go get health care. It's disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting that we have allowed a bunch of conservative traitors to take away our rights. This is horrible, and it needs to be fixed now. With that, folks, we are out of time for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. For our announcer and for everybody associated with Southpaws, please support a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.